Hi, this is Dr. Neil Boumpani, and welcome to my channel, Your Child's Education. This video is part of a series on how parents can use music to help educate their children, even if the parents themselves have had no musical training. In this video, I will discuss research findings and how they can be used to help your children. I will also share a few personal experiences. Starting in part 2 of the series, I will actually explain how parents can start educating their children through music almost right from birth. All right, first, if you don't understand anything about educational research and are a little curious to know how it works, I have a video on this channel, and the link to it is in the description below. And it's very short, and it should help you understand research. Let's start with how music affects your child. Now, this video will examine some research that supports raising your children with music. Not only can music activities help improve many other abilities, it can also boost a child's self-esteem and contribute to a child's emotional health. Before I share some research findings, please allow me to start with a little short personal story. When our granddaughter Maddie was born, I built her a beautiful maple cradle and gave my daughter Kim an MP3 player loaded with several hours of calming classical music, including a few of my own works. Maddie would fall asleep every night to this music. Well, 6 months after that, Kim and Maddie came to live with us and stayed with us for the next 5 years. And we consider these among the best 5 years of our lives.
Yeah. Look at that. Play those drums. Oh.
We noticed that when Maddie was around 3, we began to notice her interest in music. Now, she would often watch me practice my drums and my vibes and loved listening to my wife Dawn play the piano. It seemed that the music that surrounded Maddie from birth had some kind of special effect on her. When a certain musical pitch caught her ear, maybe the end of a movie, and you heard this sound, she would get up, walk over to the piano, and play the exact pitch on the piano the very first time. I believe that she was developing what musicians call perfect pitch, and I planned on teaching her as soon as she was ready to play an instrument. And before I begin, fortunately for her daughter, she married a great guy, and they moved to North Carolina. Now, a few years after Maddie moved, I began playing drums with an Atlanta-based 18-piece big band. Now, the band played big band music, and every Monday we rehearsed, and they recorded each rehearsal. Now, I took the recordings and I burned these to CDs so I could listen in the car and help improve my playing. During one of our visits to North Carolina, Maddie was in the car and was listening to one of these CDs. I asked her if she wanted me to, put something else on. She said no, she liked it, and kept listening. And before we left, came back to Georgia, I gave Kim the CD just in case Maddie wanted to hear it in the car. About 2 weeks later, Kimmy called me and asked me if I could please send some new recordings. It seems that Maddie insisted on hearing that one CD every day on the way to and from school, and my daughter needed a break. Well, I made a few more CDs of my rehearsal, along with some of my own original music, and sent them to Kim. On our next visit, when Maddie was in the car, I played a variety of genres, from classical, jazz, to old classic rock, and yes, I am an old guy. Well, I asked Maddie if she wanted me to change the music, but she was fine with just about everything. Even now, as a teenager, Maddie seems open to all styles and genres of music, unlike many of her peers. I would like to credit this to the music she heard as a baby. However, this is just my experience, so I can't even suggest this will work for all children. This was not a research study. What I can state is that playing music like this for your child when they're born certainly can't hurt. And a little later in this video, I will discuss research that actually supports what I did. But still, I can't give you my experience as research. A little note here. When Maddie was living with us, I produced a short musical work that I used to put on in the car to put Maddie to sleep. It always worked. So I'm making this work available free of charge to anyone who registers on my website, www.yourchildseducation.com. I'm also planning on creating a list of classical works that parents can use if they want to make recordings for their newborn babies or their young children to play as they sleep. I'll get that list up as soon as I possibly can. The Mozart effect. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart lived during the classical era of music history. He was a child prodigy. He composed his first works at the age of 5 and performed before Europe's nobility by the age of 6. His music is considered among the finest works of classical music. Now, during this era, composers were guided by the Enlightenment period ideals. All activities, including composing music, were to be guided by logic and reason and devoid of any emotion. This was in stark contrast to the ideals of the previous era, the Baroque, where drama and religious passion permeated music. Well, again, the classical age was also known as the Age of Enlightenment. During this time, the intelligentsia wanted a world governed by logic and reason. It was during this time that the Illuminati were born, with Mozart being one of its charter members. Well, Mozart was a master at composing music that followed these Enlightenment ideals, and people did enjoy it. It was not until Beethoven unveiled his Fifth Symphony that composing by logic and reason gave way to creating music with passion, and the classical era came to an end. Still, Mozart's music, according to the rules of the time, his music was musically and some would argue mathematically perfect. In 1993, Francis Rauscher published a research study that suggested listening to Mozart boosted the short-term spatial reasoning abilities of college students. These findings were widely published and then quickly misinterpreted by those seeking to profit from the research. The claim that Mozart make you smarter caught on, and this became known as the Mozart effect. Soon a number of companies began to market products under this false claim. One state governor, in a decidedly political move, even issued free CDs to the mothers of all newborn children in the state filled with Mozart's music. Even though the actual findings of the study made no such claims, the Mozart effect began to take on a life of its own. Well, let's examine that actual study, examine the findings, and learn how it inspired further research. I will not bore anyone by explaining the how and why the study was conducted. I just want to simply get to the conclusions. The finding of Rauscher's study suggests that listening to Mozart piano sonata may boost the spatial reasoning abilities of college students. However, the effects only lasted a short time. Well, of course, that sounds very intellectual. But let's just explain that. Spatial reasoning is the ability to understand objects both in 2- and 3-dimensional terms and draw conclusions about them with limited information. Now, spatial reasoning is also used by the brain to develop solutions to problems, an ability that is important in many professions, especially in leadership. The research never even vaguely suggested that listening to Mozart would make a person more intelligent. What the research did was to open the door to new studies that gave us some amazing results, so we can be thankful for that. All right, well, their follow-up studies concluded and agreed with Rauscher that Mozart does not make children more intelligent, but they also uncovered some other benefits. Some of the studies found that there are clear cognitive and mental benefits in learning to play a musical instrument. Considering the research of Rauscher and others, some have concluded that the music of Mozart might be a kind of audible Ritalin, suggests that if a student studies right before a test while listening to Mozart, that student may retain more information and possibly achieve better results on the test. However, like Ritalin, it wears off. Now, in another study conducted by Jaschke, Honing, and Schroeder, it was entitled A Longitudinal Analysis of Music Education on Executive Functions in Primary School Children, their research suggested that musical instruction in primary school may help students in the following ways: inhibition and planning and verbal intelligence. Now, I would interpret inhibition to mean that the music can help socialize a child. I can honestly say for myself that I was a painfully shy child until I joined the band in 5th or 6th grade. Now, another article entitled The Role of Music in Brain Development from the University of Georgia Extension website. The research claimed that children who grow up listening to music develop strong music-related connections in the brain. Some of these connections might actually affect the way a person thinks and reasons. Now, this actually supports my experience with my granddaughter. The study replicated the findings of Rauscher's study, finding that classical music can boost short-term spatial reasoning skills. However, the study also found that learning to play a musical instrument, even for a relatively short period of time, meaning a year or two, can be linked to an increase in a person's spatial reasoning skills over the long term. This is Your Brain on Music. In 2007, Daniel Levitin published his book, This is Your Brain on Music. I read this book and I highly recommend it. Now, for a quick overview of the book, you can follow the following link below, actually, to a presentation given by the author. I'm going to give you a short explanation of that video and summarize this book in as few words as possible. Now, our brain is a complex living computer that controls every aspect of our lives. Now, we may have control over some thoughts and actions, but our brain is constantly controlling most of our life functions without any thought from us. We don't have to think about breathing. We don't have to think about our heart beating. It just does. Now, it's theorized that the brain contains over 100 billion neurons, each having up to 10,000 connections with their neighbor neurons. The brain works by making electrical connections at fantastic speeds that result in decisions and actions. Levitin found that playing a musical instrument had a unique effect on the workings of the brain. Well, before I discuss those results, I'd like to explain a little bit about how the lobes of the brain function. You may already have a good idea of this, so you can skip down to what Levitin concluded, if I got that in the right chapter in the video. This will be short. How the brain works is just the basics. People may be aware that we use different areas of our brain for certain functions. These areas are called lobes. Sometimes these lobes work together to complete a task, but many times activity is limited to one lobe. We can generalize the functions of each lobe as follows. First, the frontal lobe, our emotional center, and has a lot to do with our personality. This is the area of the brain that manages our executive functions, which include solving problems, planning, making decisions, and controlling behavior. This lobe also controls attention skills and movements. Now, if you remember in the old days, sometimes if they had somebody that was supposedly insane, they would do a frontal lobotomy where they take out part of the front of their brain. And that's where controlling behavior comes from. So they were able to just take it away. The temporal lobes are located on the side of your brain above the ears. This is where we process sound, including music and decoding speech. These lobes also manage our emotions, help us recognize things and faces, and store our memories. The parietal lobes are behind the frontal lobes and above the temporal lobes. They control our sense of touch and help us understand where we are in relation to things around us. This is also where we process math, spelling, and control eye-to-hand movements and fine motor movements. Finally, the occipital lobes are at the back of our brain and control vision and visual perception. This is also where we interpret colors and motion. So if a person's colorblind, it means that something in the occipital lobe went haywire. This is what Levitin concluded. Now, Levitin studied the electrical impulses that take place in our brain as we perform certain tasks. As these activities were monitored, a computer simulation would show which areas of the brains were being utilized by sort of lighting up in the image on the screen. He found that when a subject is performing math computations, the parietal lobes were doing most of the work. Well, this was already known, but he was also able to measure that activity. Also, as expected, the temporal lobes worked to decode speech and sound. At times, some activities would use two or more lobes working together to complete a task. What the research demonstrated, and is not a suggestion if you listen to my research video, this is scientific data, was that there is one and only one activity where a person utilizes his entire brain. That activity occurs when someone is playing a musical instrument. Because of this study, we can now make the statement that learning to play a musical instrument is like physical exercise for your brain, calisthenics, if you would. Without a doubt, musical instruction can aid in all aspects of a child's education. I've also read other studies that suggested focused listening also utilized much of the brain, not as much as playing an instrument, but it did. When I used to teach college music appreciation, I used to really try to get students to learn to focus their listening. I don't think I was successful in a lot of areas, but still, a focused listener is using more of their brain. Music and health. Because of the unique way our brain interprets music, music has also been used to heal. That old expression, music soothes the savage breast. It's not savage beast. It got really turned around at some point. People used to say, music soothes the savage beast. Well, why don't you take Mozart out when you go on a lion hunting trip and see if Mozart makes the lion calm down? I don't think so. So the expression really is, music soothes the savage breast. That's easy to understand. Most of us look to music to help change our mood at times, or sometimes even allow us to wallow in it. Like in the song On and On, where the singer laments his lost love, so he has to, quote-unquote, put on Sinatra and start to cry. But music can do so much more than just alter our moods. It can be used to physically heal people. Let's examine one such story. In 2011, Gabrielle Gifford, a congresswoman from Arizona, was shot in the head as she was meeting constituents in a parking lot. The gunman shot a total of 18 people that day, 6 of whom died. Now, Gifford did not die, but one bullet had to be removed from the area of her brain that controls speech. Doctors were able to save her life, but in the process, she lost the ability to speak. Now, her rehabilitation was long and painful. There's a video link below where you can see some of this, but let me explain it first. You could just witness the pain and frustration that she experienced while she was trying to relearn how to say simple words. Now, she knew the word in her mind. She knew what the word was, but her mouth could not form the correct sounds. The pathways in her brains had been severed by the incident and couldn't connect. Now, as you watch the video, you can feel her frustration. You could feel for her. And she just cries at the inability to form even simple words. Now, the therapist tried to console her and promises that things would get better. Now, it's right at that moment that the therapist took a different approach and began to sing the children's song, "This Little Light of Mine." Almost instantly, Gifford joined in, clearly forming the words that only a few seconds earlier were impossible to speak. Here we see music being utilized to help the brain rewire the pathways needed for speech. As amazing as this is only one such example of this power of music to heal. Now remember, music has a way of connecting the brain that nothing else can. So that's how she was able to, rewire her brain and learn to pronounce those words by singing. Okay, and there's a link to the video here. If you want to watch it, go to the 2:30 point in the video. Loneliness and the teenage suicide rate. We're facing an epidemic of suicide among young people all across America. There are many reasons given for the rise, including the loneliness many people felt when they had to remain at home alone for months during the pandemic. Also, the reliance on social media to connect people has contributed to people feeling detached from others, even when they're with people in another group. If you ever watch a group of teenagers together, sometimes they're all on their phones. They've almost lost how to talk to people face to face. This happens even when people are together, like I said. Now, the sudden rise in suicides amongst transgender teenagers, for whatever reason, we're not going into the reasons here, has also contributed to many of our young people taking their own lives. This is a sad commentary on our society. We've lost our moral compass. Now, there are studies that suggest music can help alleviate much of the fear and loneliness that haunts humans so much of the time. Singing is one activity that people can do even when physically isolated. Now, during the lockdown that was caused by the pandemic, there were some towns in Italy found a way to overcome loneliness. Neighbors would stand on their balconies or in their windows, and they'd sing together. Now, people who have considered suicide can tell you that at times simply talking is not enough. Music, on the other hand, has a way of touching us beyond the words. Remember that music is the one activity that uses the entire brain. So sometimes singing a song, maybe it's associated with better days. It reaches that memory part of our brain that gives us the reason to live, maybe. So maybe, perhaps young people getting together on Zoom for a group sing, or even simply calling a friend to sing, can help when the loneliness is driving them to consider ending their lives. I think we should teach this to all children. When you're at that point, call somebody, ask them to sing with you. And if somebody calls you, no matter how bad the singing is, sing along with them. Try to lift their spirits. Let's talk about Alzheimer's disease. Perhaps some of you had the experience of watching a loved one suffer through Alzheimer's disease. My mother suffered for 8 years as the disease crippled her mind and took away all of her dignity. At first, she just said crazy things, and she began to forget who I was, and towards the end, all she could do was babble like a baby. For a long time, before she totally lost the ability to communicate, the only thing that would bring her back to the real world, at least for a short time, was music. When she heard music, she smiled, sang along, and even danced, until she broke her hip. It reminded me of when she sang to me as a child. Now, my mother had the absolute worst sense of pitch and was the most god-awful singer that I ever heard. And hearing her sing towards the end of her life, when she still could, to me was like hearing an angelic chorus. The area we're talking about when we talk about healing through music is music therapy. Now, people who use music to aid in the healing of others are called music therapists. In my first years of teaching college theory, I had a student who was really struggling to get through her theory and oral skills. She worked hard and with a little help made it through her associate's degree. She then went on to successfully earn a degree in music therapy. The last time I spoke to her, she was loving what she was doing. She was underpaid, had to continually renew her certification through courses, but she was one of those rare people who found a fulfilling career in doing what she loved. Unfortunately, music therapy is too often overlooked and underutilized in a society where we've learned to rely on prescription drugs. But sometimes when all else fails, I would not hesitate to suggest to somebody that's really struggling to try some kind of music therapy. Conclusions. There's certainly enough research to support including a music education program in the lives of your children. Whether you homeschool your children or send them to public, private, parochial, or charter schools, consider getting them involved in music and preferably have them learn a musical instrument. In many states, even homeschooled children can take part in public school extracurricular activities, including music, band, ensembles, so on and so forth. In the meantime, watch the next part of this discussion. I'm going to start to give parents ways to use music at a very young age to prepare your student to learn and grow in a love for music as well. So keep that in mind, and thank you very much. If you liked the video, please subscribe, like, ring the bell, whatever. And please visit my site at www.yourchildseducation.com, and you can register and get that free MP3, and eventually I'll have a list of classical tunes that you can use if you know somebody with a baby. Thank you very much. See you next time.